do not want to have to mute. We do not have to want to mute people. So if you are not speaking, please keep yourself muted. And also, this meeting is being recorded. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us. I do realize it was short notice, but things are happening so quickly, and it's within our Texas legislature. And so as the Texas Poor People's Campaign, we wanted to make sure that we kept you all abreast of what's happening and what we are fighting against in Texas. Stephanie will be reading our statement from the Poor People's Campaign regarding to SB 7. Stephanie?
So first of all, like Danita said, I wanted to say thank you to everyone. I know we've had a lot of calls and a lot of actions over the past 2 or 3 weeks, and we're building momentum to that June 7th press conference where we will be putting the call on our U.S. congressional delegation to pass the resolution that calls for a third Reconstruction here in America. So we will share the link to that June 7th press conference. Tonight, we're going to have a statewide call, but we're looking for volunteers to help with that. I also wanted to mention really quick that while all of this is going on with the campaign, we also had to deal with a lot of stuff here in Texas. We had a Medicaid hearing this past Tuesday. We're going to have another one on, the state's going to have another one on June 15th. And we sent out a recording to a training event that we held. Those hearings are super important for folks to participate in. And on top of that, we've had to deal with the state. So we've been running like crazy, trying to keep up with everything. So thank you all for being here on short notice. We appreciate you. So over the weekend, as you guys know, the state tried to pass a massive voter suppression bill. And I'm going to go ahead and read directly from the statement. I know the statement is long, but the point of it also was to help let folks know what exactly was in that huge omnibus bill. So people are aware of what the state was trying to do and the potential impacts of what that would have looked like. Okay, so I'm going to read through half, and then I'm going to pass it to Danita to pick up the other half. So the Texas Poor People's Campaign stands with Texas legislators who walked out of the House on Sunday, denying Republicans a quorum on the House floor and ultimately killing the voter suppression bill SB 7, at least for the time being. Democratic lawmakers used a common tool from the labor movement's toolbox, a walkout, to send a clear message of disapproval to conservative lawmakers that extreme voter suppression is not only undemocratic, it is also dangerous. In both the House and Senate, lawmakers tried to ram this legislation through their chambers by bypassing normal operating rules and procedures, and by shutting out Democratic lawmakers from discussions and debates. They even conducted business on SB 7 in the dead of night when most Texans were at home sleeping. These shameful tactics gave Democratic House members enough of a reason to walk out of the House before the bill could be voted on. SB 7 would have empowered partisan poll watchers by allowing more access to polling places and created criminal penalties against election officials who tried to restrict their movement. It would have prevented county election officials from sending vote-by-mail applications to those who did not request one. So people that live in the community, the election official wasn't allowed to send out vote-by-mail applications to folks in the community. They would have eliminated drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, measures that were added to keep people safe during the pandemic and that were disproportionately used by voters of color. It made it easier for elections to be overturned by the courts if someone suspected votes were cast, quote unquote, illegally. It would have shortened early voting hours on Sundays, which would eliminate souls to the polls campaigns led by Black churches. It would have imposed new restrictions and barriers on volunteers that wanted to drive voters to the polls. And earlier versions of the bill targeted the disability community by requiring some sort of documentation be presented that listed their disability. In the words of Reverend Barber, a poll tax by another name is still a poll tax. Voting rights should not depend on which political party rules the legislature. Voting is a right that many people in our nation have fought and died for. We cannot let our right to vote be taken away from us by conservative lawmakers that have been emboldened by Trump's big lie about voter fraud in the 2020 elections. Those claims have been discredited by every court that's reviewed them. The Attorney General's office spent 22,000 hours this past year investigating claims of voter fraud, and only 16 minor cases were found in the Houston area. This is after, I think, 9 million votes were cast statewide in that 2020 general election. Okay, I'm gonna pass it over to Janita now to finish it out.
Thank you, Stephanie, and my apologies for not introducing Stephanie. Stephanie is one of our co-chairs for the Texas Poor People's Campaign. In fact, it's been the state that has been the biggest culprit of manipulating elections over the past decade. In 2011, the state adopted discriminatory election maps that significantly discriminated against voters of color and prevented them from electing candidates of choice. Shortly thereafter, the legislature passed a harsh voter ID law that went on to be found intentionally discriminatory by every court that reviewed it. That bill alone was said to have disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of voters. And then recently in 2019, the newly appointed Secretary of State, David Whitley, attempted to purge over 90,000 citizens from the voter rolls, many of which were naturalized citizens. These abuses were carried out by lawmakers with surgical precision, and they specifically targeted communities of color. We must change the narrative in this state and stop allowing conservative lawmakers to obscure the facts. The truth is that conservative lawmakers spent the legislative session focusing on culture wars rather than trying to address the real crises impacting our state, like pandemic relief or the lack of access to affordable health care. Reverend Dr. William Barber II, one of our co-chairs at the National Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, released a statement. The Texas extremist governor and legislature are afraid of democracy. They want to suppress the votes of Black people, Latino people, Native people, women, young people, basically anybody who will elect politicians who believe in living wages and healthcare for all, and who would challenge the ruling elites and modern day money changers. They want an impoverished democracy, so we must fight for true Democrats. Trump didn't make them this way. They've always believed in a racist Southern strategy, but our commitment to love, truth, and justice mean we can't let them win. To stop these state legislatures, we need full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, bill to protect democracy, and a third Reconstruction Now. Governor Abbott has already indicated that he will call a special session to revive SB 7, and we will be ready for him when he does. Our rights shall not be unduly stripped away based on lies made by the Republican Party. We must mobilize, organize, register, and educate people for a movement who votes. And today we call this press conference along with other civic leaders and faith leaders throughout the state of Texas. And some of them will issue statements here during this press conference, and I'll introduce them as follows. We have Reverend Stephanie Wilkins of Blue Ridge United Methodist Church of Houston, Stephanie Ham, an advocate and former organizer with Move On, and myself, Danita Jones, co-chair of the Texas Poor People's Campaign, and also co-founder of Lake Highlands Moms Against Racism. And I will turn it over to Reverend Stephanie.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And thank you, Danita and Stephanie. You said everything very well in the statement. The thing that I want to add to it is just, for me, being a part of the Poor People's Campaign is because it is nonpartisan. It is because that we recognize that this is a moral issue. This is a civil rights issue. This is a human rights issue. for those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, we know that Jesus was on the side of the oppressed, the disenfranchised, the marginalized. For those of other faiths, we know that God is a God of love. So anything that we or anyone does that would cause harm, that's not of God, in my opinion. It is distressing to see the lengths that the lawmakers are going to try to silence the voices. We are supposed to be a free and just democracy. How can that be? If you are not free to be who you are, then is anyone really free? We stand together because we know that we are right. And I pray that so many more will come alongside to be allies and advocates and speak up and speak out against these injustices. We've got to fight this. We praise those lawmakers who did walk out, but it is just, it delayed it. It has to be stopped. It must be stopped. We will not stop fighting. We will not stop speaking up. We know that we have right on our side. So I thank you. I pray that you will talk to others about the Poor People's Campaign and about this resolution. If you can be with us on June the 7th at 11 o'clock, please let us know in the chat how we can contact you, because we are going to win. It may take a while, but we are going to win. And as we say, forward together, not one step back.
Awesome. Thank you, Reverend Stephanie. And now we'll move on to Stephanie Ham, advocate and former organizer with Move On.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I hope you can hear. We've got storms rolling through and internet is shaky, even in 2021. So thank you for everything all of you have said. I would say the Texas Legislature is probably one of the most regressive. It's been a struggle, I know, for the past 10, 12 years that I've been active. I think it's very confusing, complicated, but definitely in-person testimony at least makes the mark. So I know that Danita and Stephanie, there's a lot of us here, are trying to train us and get us ready to be those testifiers, or if not directly in Austin, however we can do this online. We need to make noise. One of the issues with the Democrats who walked out is they are small in number. So whatever we can do to raise them, not as maybe Democrats, not as partisan, but because of the issues. This is really frightening that we would have, in my lifetime, such a backwards move in terms of access to the voting booth. So I thank everyone on the Poor People's Campaign, and especially here in Texas, for bringing up this wonderful resolution, this congressional resolution for the establishment of a third Reconstruction. It's a marvelous idea that we can work very hard to realize over the next 500 days. And then here in Texas, bring it to fruition in whatever way we can. I will say one thing about my experience with Move On. I did a lot of telephone work. I haven't started to do that for the Poor People's Campaign, but I was always amazed when I called into little towns. Texas actually had the largest 191,000.
Stephanie, I think we might have lost you. I think it might have been the storms that you mentioned at the beginning. Are you still there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, there you are.
Okay. Just anyway, when I did the phone calls, I was surprised to find that Texas had the largest contingent of volunteers for Move On, 191,000. And that's because Texans were afraid to bring their issues to the front. They were afraid in small towns to voice their opinions. Let's pick up the megaphone of the Poor People's Campaign and make
some noise. I'm assuming she
Yeah,
probably
makes noise. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. And so this is, like we said, this is to get the word out, to let everyone know, let everyone in your networks know. The Poor People's Campaign, we operate on principles and demands. And I'm going to share two of those, one from each. We recognize the need to organize at the state and local level. Many of the most regressive policies are being passed at the state level, and these policies will have long and lasting effects past even executive orders. The movement is not from above, but from below. The truth is that when the democratic process and the right to vote are restricted, preempted, and nullified, our democracy is under attack. These attacks target people of color, especially the poor, youth, and elderly. But in doing so, they strip us all of our constitutional protections. They allow extremists to get elected through voter suppression and racial gerrymandering, and then use their power to hurt people of all races. We are tired. We declare that if silence was betrayal in 1968, revival is necessary today. We come to remind the state of Texas what truths we hold to be self-evident and what values we hold dear. We draw on the histories of resistance that echo their truth down through the centuries and the power of the blood that has been shed through generations of struggle. We loudly proclaim that we will move forward together and not one step back, because our backs are against the wall and we have no choice but to fight. We're tired, we're angry, and we've had enough. A change is coming to Texas. Thank you all for joining our press conference. We hope you will join us tonight on our statewide call. We hope you will join us June 7th for our resolution and our press conference. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.